The state of West Virginia has a problem. We have more convicted criminals than we have the resources to punish them according to the law. We'll talk about criminal sentencing law reform right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar and the Monongalia County Bar Association.
The West Virginia Law Institute has been asked by the state of West Virginia to recommend changes to its laws concerning criminal sentencing. My guests are West Virginia Law Institute Director David Hardesty and WVU Law Professor and scribe to the Institute, Robert Bastress. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Dan.
Professor Hardesty, could you tell us just a little bit about what the Law Institute is?
The Law Institute is a body created by the West Virginia Legislature, and its role is to recommend reforms from time to time, which the legislature will take up and consider. They may or may not pass the reforms into law, but they do consider them. The members of the Institute are members of the bar. There are judges, including the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, members of the legislature, such as the judiciary chairs, representatives of the governor's office, and others like that. It's hopefully a representative body that can consider the need for reform in specified areas and make a report to the legislature.
And as yourself, academics, law professors.
Right.
Also.
We have 4 members of the law school faculty that are on the group, and I serve as the director as part of the law school's commitment to service to the state. One of my jobs at the law school is to be the administrative head of the Law Institute.
In most other areas of life, we might call this a blue ribbon panel or something of that nature, because they're people who are knowledgeable about the law and about problems and possible improvements.
Hopefully, yes.
And Professor Bastress, you're technically the reporter, which is kind of the scribe and chief researcher for this organization.
Right. I'm responsible for collecting the data, doing the research in the literature on criminal justice, and we also did a lot to gather information from those who are on the field, on the ground in West Virginia, working with criminal justice issues. And when we put all that together into our report, I'm the person responsible for doing that.
We have a lead researcher on every project. They're called the reporter. Professor Bastress was chosen because of his well-known and well-deserved reputation as an expert in matters related to this subject.
Why are we talking about this?
The state has a problem, and that problem is that the statutes of the state, the criminal statutes, are resulting in sentences which are raising the criminal population in the state to the point that the governor and members of the legislature are becoming concerned about the cost, to the point that they might not be able to sustain it without tax increases. It costs about, in West Virginia, about $28,000 to $30,000 a year to incarcerate a prisoner. Many of our sentences go over long periods of time. With inflation, that can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars per prisoner. And the cost is a problem in 28 states today. And in fact, the federal courts in California have told California to solve prison overcrowding, or they're going to have to release prisoners because of the nature of the punishment being, in their opinion, being cruel and unusual. So we are headed to the point where we will not have enough beds for the prisoners that are being sentenced by the system, and it is a taxpayer problem.
Yeah, there are a large number of people out there who will say, so what, this ain't no country club. If you're going to have to sleep on the floor, you have to sleep on the floor.
Well, the cost of prisons, of course, is a lot more than food and televisions. I mean, it's guards.
So, see, there's the problem. You're having televisions for the prisoners.
Well, I mean, you know, I don't want people to think that all of the cost of prisons goes into taking care of the prisoners. There are the cost of the buildings, their high maintenance, high security. The guards who are traditionally underpaid and want a good life for themselves, just like any other worker for the state. You have the administrative costs, the legal costs associated with keeping a prisoner. It is a costly proposition. The federal system's about $45,000 to $50,000 per prisoner. In our state, it's about $28,000. So you can see we are doing well in terms of efficiency, but we just have a large number of prisoners.
Well, in relatively recent times, we've built quite a significant system of regional jails. We've built a couple of new prisons. The prison at Mount Olivet in the southern part of the state is relatively new. We closed or at least an old bad prison at Moundsville. It just simply outlived its usefulness.
Right. I think that's all to the state's credit. But what we're facing, if we don't do something, is building another prison. And the cost of that is estimated to be over $150 million.
As an interesting point, the federal government has the same sort of problems with its criminal sentencing laws. They're locking up an awful lot of people. And I practice some federal criminal law, and within my group of friends on both sides, as prosecutors, as defendants, as judges, as court personnel in other areas, the joke is it seems like we're down the path where we're building a federal prison facility on every intersection of highways.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
It's largely attributable to the war on drugs. I mean, we have all these federal drug laws now, and the federal drug sentencing guidelines are quite severe. Much more longer sentences in federal court than in state court for drug violations.
You know, I read, Dan, that the United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. Well, and that gives you an idea of the problem we're facing.
And the way I heard that was that we have the largest per capita incarceration rate of any country in what we think of as the civilized world.
And we have the largest raw number of persons behind bars as well. It's not just the percentage, it's the largest raw number of prisoners.
Why does West Virginia have a problem with too many prisoners?
Well, I think there are probably lots of reasons for that Professor Bastress could speak to better than I, but we have some laws that are outdated, old-fashioned, adopted in the 1800s, and they are sometimes confusing and result in longer sentences that are probably fair. We have traditionally used incarceration as opposed to treatment, community treatment, or rehabilitation. There are other reasons, Bob, you might want to comment.
Well, I mean, those are a good start. We are 50th in the country in the use of alternative sentencing, that is, alternative to incarceration. So that's a partial explanation. And I think another explanation is that West Virginia, like much of the country, had a reaction to the increased crime rate in the 70s. And then this sort of momentum built for get tough on crime. And it resulted in longer sentences for a number of crimes and more resistance to the use of parole and things of that nature.
When I started thinking about this program, the phrase that popped into my mind immediately was political will. Every candidate that runs for elected office seems to run on a get tough on crime platform, whether they believe it or not. I've had some politicians come to me and say, yeah, that's what I said to get elected. That's not really what I think.
I really think that that's understandable. I mean, none of us want to be afraid to live in our communities. We don't want to worry about having our houses broken into. We want our children and us to be safe. What is putting this on the burner is there is a countervailing policy consideration, and that is the cost of this is going to drive taxes up pretty dramatically. And the cost of this is going to take funding out of education, roads, and other issues if we're not careful. And I think the legislature, in asking a body like the Institute, which has a balanced group on it, is saying we do have a problem. We're not sure how to resolve it. Would you think about it and give us your best advice?
One legislator told me, a state senator, just recently, he said, you know, we have basically two kinds of people that we're dealing with in criminal sentencing issues. We have the people we're afraid of, the murderers, the rapists, the abusers and assaulters. He said we have the people that we're mad at. And the mad at are the non-violent criminals, the drug users, not the drug dealers necessarily, but the drug users who are hurting themselves and their families. And we have to draw a line somewhere and say, these are the kinds of people we must lock up, and these are the kinds of people we must punish, help, treat, reform.
Right. 76% of the prisoners committed to the Division of Corrections, more or less year in and year out, are nonviolent offenders.
76%?
Yeah, about 3/4. And the largest two groups are property crimes and drug crimes. And I think those are the sort of the target groups for rehabilitation efforts. And there are programs being developed. There's been a lot of research in the last 10, 15 years trying to figure out what works and what doesn't in terms of rehabilitation. The attitude in the 70s and 80s was nothing works. That there had been, the research indicated it didn't matter what you do, a criminal will be likely to recidivate. And that thinking has changed. And now that we have the development of what are called evidence-based programs. Evidence being the data is collected to see if a program works. And if it works, you put it into place. By working, I mean it achieves some correctional goal, usually recidivism, reducing recidivism. And we found that some things do work, and particularly for those target groups who commit the nonviolent and drug crimes and so forth. And a lot of it is, a lot of our crime problem is related to substance abuse. Either the person commits a drug crime, or they commit a property crime in order to be able to buy drugs, or they lose their rationality while they're on drugs or drunk or whatever, and then they use poor judgment and commit a crime.
One of the things we've done during the course of this is to solicit input from a large number of different groups in the legal justice system. And we found a lot of very commendable efforts to innovate in this area. You might want to talk about a couple of those.
Yeah, it tends to be county by county. Some counties have really gotten into what we call community corrections, which are alternatives to incarceration. Drug courts are the most common, and day report centers have programs, and most of them deal with substance abusers, most of the programs. But there are other kinds, those with mental health issues. Some counties have mental health courts as well as drug courts. The Northern Panhandle now has what's called a reentry court to deal with certain prisoners that are being removed from the Division of Corrections. They include 3 different groups: those that are Axis I diagnosed individuals or have a substance abuse problem. They get treatment at these centers. They're moved to alternative housing, and they get treatment there. Another group are those who are in Division of Corrections custody but are eligible for parole but can't get released because they don't have a home to go to. So the counties give these people a home to live, then help them get a job and to make the transition back into society. And then there are parole eligible individuals, except for the fact they have not yet, because of their crime, spent the 6 months in the penitentiary. They have to, and they're being moved into these alternative housings, and then they work with the courts to make sure they stay clean.
One of the things that may cross your mind when you hear us talk about community corrections programs and things like mental health courts and drug courts and that sort of thing is they're spending money creating new courts and hiring new judges and things like that, and that's really not the way these things operate. These community corrections programs are really functions of the circuit court in the county in which they're located. You heard Professor Bastress say it's mostly a county by county thing, and that's really how it works.
Dan, I heard one judge describe a lot of these things as specialized dockets, taking them all up at the same time, looking at clusters of treatments for the same kind of crimes and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
and
projects of the court
projects
in that
of the court system. You know, what we're seeing, the innovation is coming from the county level and from the circuit courts, and the West Virginia Supreme Court is very interested in this. They're all trying different ways of facing this mounting problem of prison overcrowding.
Well, and I had wanted to mention that earlier in the show. We talk about the governor being interested in this and asking the Law Institute to get involved, the legislature wanting the Law Institute to get involved. The members of the Supreme Court are in the same position. They, in fact, have talked about this at length, and every time a drug court is started or some innovative project is started, you can be sure the member of the state Supreme Court, usually the Chief Justice, is going to be there to explain the importance to them and to the state of these different projects.
That was certainly one of then Chief Justice, he's no longer Chief, Brent Benjamin's big priorities. I mean, he made every drug court graduation program in the state.
Yes, in fact, that's where I found out his interest about it, was at the dedication in Montague County of the drug court. Well, what are we looking to change then when we talk about reviewing these statutes or reconsidering how they're written?
Well, I think someone mentioned earlier that the West Virginia Criminal Code is basically a collection of laws that have accumulated over 100 and, well, the length of the state, we're almost up to 150 years now. And in fact, some of them were a part of the 1849 Virginia Code that we just incorporated. So there are a lot of archaic laws. They're not. It's piecemeal. There are a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of inequalities because they've been done at different points in times, and there's never been a real code created. It's just been this collection of statutes, and nobody's taken the big picture and created a code in which you identify different levels of crimes and clearly define them and make it clear to both individuals and to those working in the criminal justice system what these laws mean. So as a consequence, the state is in real need of a complete overhaul of our criminal code. Somebody who can come in and draft something which is coherent and consistent with other provisions.
Well, one of the things that
we don't have the time for that. That's why we're not doing that. The legislature told us back in September, we want you to complete this report by January, by the beginning of the session, and so obviously a rehaul.
We're doing the best we can, but the governor started. The governor's task force on criminal sentencing, or the governor's commission, is to be given great credit. The review of the criminal code is only one of the ideas they recommended. There are others. But we're all looking for ways to reduce this overcrowding process. And in the process, problem. And in the process, we may be fairer. You know, right now there are tremendous opportunities for inconsistent sentencing, excessive sentencing, too lenient sentencing. I mean, there are a lot of problems to be looked at when you start looking at the inconsistencies in the code today.
Can you give us some examples maybe of inconsistencies in the sentencing?
Well, I can certainly give you examples of problems that contribute to overcrowding and contribute to what are inequalities or inequities. One that is repeatedly mentioned to us by those working in the criminal justice system is the first-degree robbery statute, which used to be 5 to 20 years or something like that, and it was changed back in the mid-90s for a minimum of 10 years with no maximum. So you end up with...
First-degree robbery would be what?
Robbery in which the person committing the crime puts the victim into some sort of physical danger, or some sort of physical force is asserted against the person.
So if you pulled a knife out or a gun out and pointed at somebody, that would
right,
or
you used a weapon in the crime. That would be a sort of alternative. And so there have been cases of first-degree robbery applied to purse snatchers. In a couple cases in Kanawha County not too long ago, in which a person, in the course of snatching the purse, used force and ran off with the purse and was sentenced to 10 years. It's a minimum of 10 years and no maximum. And so we've had robbery sentences in this state of 90 and 100 years, which basically, of course, is a sentence for life.
So a 10-year sentence, Dan, is upwards of $300,000, $325,000 tab for the taxpayer. The question is, can we accomplish some kind of punishment that works for a less price?
And we have a statute that says all armed robberies, aggravated robberies, first-degree robberies are the same, whether it's a purse snatching
Well, it needs to be better defined. And then you need a more rational sentence than 10 to whatever. For example, the Division of Corrections did a study covering about 7 years, 2000 to 2006, I think. And in that 7-year period, the average sentence for robbery in this state was the highest there was. It was higher than for murder or for sex crimes. So obviously judges are using it to hammer people. And of course, making these generalizations doesn't take into account whether it's his second robbery or third robbery or whatever, but nevertheless, it's still an indication. And particularly when you compare our robbery statute to those around us, among Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, 2 of the states are 10 to 20. One of them is a maximum of 10, and another one is a maximum of 20. And so I think that's more the mainstream in terms of sentencing in this country, that a robbery gets a 10 to 20, something in that range, not a 30 to 40. And there are some others. Forgery and uttering is the description for basically forging bad checks. Okay, I mean that's the most common.
Uttering means to
forgery
use. Means to make the instrument. Uttering means to pass it to somebody.
Right, exactly. And that carries a sentence of 1 to 10, without regard, 1 to 10 years, without regard to the amount that the check had. So if you forge a check and use it to buy a pack of cigarettes, it's a 1 to 10. It's a felony. You go to the penitentiary, assuming there's a bed for you, and it'd be just the same sentence as writing for $500,000 check. In addition, it's not one felony, it's 2. The forgery is one crime, and the use of that forged instrument is another. So every time you run a bad check, you're committing 2 crimes.
So even if you're sitting at home and you think, I need to go buy milk and bread for my children, and you forge a check and then don't pass it,
right,
you're still guilty of a felony.
That's forgery, yeah.
And that's a sentence of a minimum of a year.
1 to 10, right. Now you'd have to do it with the intent to pass it, but nevertheless,
well, you
that
think
would be the case.
think you're going to go do it. You know, people will see the Broadway play Les Mis, and they'll think, what a horrible situation this poor man got himself into by, what was it, stealing a loaf of bread or something, Jean Valjean. And we come home, and that's what we do. Or at least we have the capability or the potential of doing that with our system of laws.
Yeah, so that's been our chore. We've reviewed the code to identify what are inconsistencies or ambiguities, thinking that the more ambiguity you have, the more opportunity there is or potential that there will be an unjust sentence. And we've also identified certain provisions that have accumulated over the year which actually take discretion away from the judge. And we think current thinking on criminal sentencing is that there needs to be individualized decision making. And so, I mean, this state for years has had the three strike laws, 3 felonies, and you go to prison for life. And there are about, last I looked, somewhere in the range of 45 prisoners in West Virginia serving a life sentence under that provision. And of course, life sentences are quite expensive.
And that sometimes is 3 felony convictions for relatively minor crimes.
It can be, yeah. The Supreme Court has actually put some, through the Article 3 of the West Virginia Constitution, has imposed limits. There's a provision in the Constitution which says a penalty shall be proportional to the crime, and if you have, say, 2 fairly minimal property felonies, let's say, combined with another one that might be more serious, the Supreme Court might say you can't give that person a life sentence. But it's a very limited restriction on sentencing. And it's basically up to the prosecutor whether they want to seek this life sentence or not. The judge, if the prosecutor seeks it, the judge has no discretion to deny it.
Well, and prosecutors sometimes, we say they have prosecutorial discretion, but they don't really exercise it because they're elected officials and they want to appear to be tough on crime to become reelected. I've seen this time and time and time again. So they will present these cases to a jury, and then if the jury returns a conviction, in most cases there are convictions.
It is, well, at least I've been told that in a lot of counties in West Virginia, prosecutors in doing plea bargains tend to, well, that varies a lot too, but in one major county, They're fairly reasonable in plea bargaining situations, but if you go to trial, then they'll seek the max on you. And that's maybe part of the adversarial process.
Well, I think there's an issue here, and that is public awareness is somewhat limited of the criminal justice system. And one thing about what we're doing here today, hopefully we'll awaken a few people to ask them to think about the complexity of the criminal justice system and how we can be fair and be just.
This is going to be an ongoing process. There's talk of creating sentencing commissions to continually review incarcerated statistics and criminal processes. It's going to go on for a long time. You're not going to be done next month, guys. Dave Hardesty, Bob Bastress, gentlemen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the Law Works, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening.
If you want to know if you need a lawyer, you can discuss your problems with a lawyer by calling the West Virginia State Bar Helpline, toll-free, Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 at 1-800-642-3617. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks show topics, information on how to obtain copies of the programs, and additional information about this show's topic. You'll also find a list of legal resources that can help you answer your legal questions. If you'd like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll also find video of this program on thelawworks.org. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The Law Works show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a copy of this program for classroom use, please send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar and the Monongalia County Bar Association.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.